Did the ancient Egyptians truly engage in carnal connection with animals to touch the divine? At first, this question sounds like a fabrication, an exaggeration bordering on insanity. But if we immerse ourselves in the world of ancient Egypt, a place where people saw divinity in every grain of sand, in the sunlight, in the flow of the Nile, in the eyes of a cat, in the soaring wings of a falcon, we realize it is not entirely illogical. Egyptian civilization, spanning over 3,000 years, created one of the most complex and mystical belief systems in human history. For them, the world existed not only in its tangible form, but also contained countless layers of sacred meaning. It was at this intersection that animals became the bridge between humans and the gods. Animals, the incarnation of deities. In many ancient civilizations, animals were considered companions, sources of strength that supported humans. But in Egypt, animals were elevated to a sacred status, becoming symbols, the vessels of the gods. The Apis bull. The image of a strong, virile bull was seen by the Egyptians as the incarnation of Ptah, the god of creation, fertility, and rebirth. The bulls chosen to be Apis had to meet 29 specific criteria, from the color of their coat and their shape to the patterned markings on their foreheads. Once an Apis bull was recognized, it lived as a living god. It had its own temple, was offered food, was revered, and when it died, all of Egypt mourned. Sobek the crocodile. If Apis represented prosperity, Sobek symbolized violence, lust, and power. Living in the Nile, the crocodile both terrified the populace and commanded their worship as a force of nature and sexuality. Sobek was considered a god who could grant or take away life, and rituals related to him were often both sacred and terrifying. Bastet the cat. With eyes that shone brightly in the night, a graceful demeanor, and predatory instincts, the cat became the symbol of the goddess Bastet, the goddess of charm, pleasure, and protection. In Egyptian families, cats were revered as sacred members. Killing a cat could be punishable by death. Horus the falcon. The wings of the falcon stretching across the sky became the image of Horus, the god of the sky, war, and protection. But Horus was not just the eye of justice. He was also associated with the phallic symbol, the penis representing reproductive power and masculine strength. From this deep connection, the Egyptians no longer saw animals as mere beasts, but as gods in flesh and blood. Sexuality in Egyptian religion. For most civilizations, sex is considered an instinctual act or one tied to family and procreation. But for the Egyptians, sexuality transcended all that. It became a religious ritual. In Egyptian mythology, the world was born from the sexual union of the gods. The god Adam was said to have created the universe through masturbation. Isis and Osiris, the divine couple, represented love, fertility, and the harvest. Horus and Set had a story of conflict involving sexuality, representing a struggle for power and balance. Therefore, sex in Egyptian life was not merely carnal pleasure. It was a ritual to recreate the cosmos, a way for humans to participate in the endless cycle of life. In fertility festivals and offering ceremonies, sex appeared as a sacred tool. Sometimes it was symbolic through statues and phallic carvings. But sometimes it was practical, and it was there that the line between the divine and the profane blurred. Extreme deification, the seed of horrific rituals. When a bull was seen as Apis, it was no longer livestock but a living god. When a crocodile was associated with Sobek, it was not just a predator but the power of lust and life. When the cat was Bastet, it embodied femininity, charm, and pleasure. From this belief, the Egyptians began to construct rituals that sound chilling to us today. Records from Herodotus and surviving legends all indicate that the union between humans and animals, whether symbolic or carnal, once existed as part of religious ceremony. To the Egyptians, This was not defilement but a form of devotion. They believed that by physically merging with the incarnation of a deity, they were opening a gateway connecting the mortal world with the eternal one. A glimpse into the next part. And it was these very rituals that were recorded by Herodotus, the father of history, in his chronicles. He wrote of ceremonies where women offered themselves to goats, of acts that the Greeks considered barbaric, but the Egyptians deemed sacred. What led a magnificent civilization like Egypt to accept such horrifying rituals? Where is the line between religious faith and fanatical extremism? Herodotus, a Greek historian who lived in the 5th century BC, is known to posterity as the father of history. He was one of the first not only to record events but also to seek to explain their causes, linking them to the customs, religion, and mentality of each nation. During his journey to Egypt, Herodotus witnessed many strange things, and his writings became a precious though fiercely debated source of information for millennia. One of the passages that shocked and even disgusted readers in both Greek and Roman times was his description of sexual rituals involving sacred animals. Herodotus recounted that in some parts of Egypt, women were offered to goats in a special religious ceremony. To the Greeks, this was an unacceptable act. In the Greek worldview, sex could be linked to mythology like the stories of Zeus turning into a swan or a bull to seduce mortal women. But it was all confined to myth and never practiced in real-life rituals. Therefore, when reading or hearing about Egyptians offering women to goats, the Greeks could only utter one word, barbaric. However, in the eyes of the ancient Egyptians, this act was not shameful. On the contrary, it was cloaked in sanctity. The goat, an incarnation of a local deity, became a bridge between the earthly and the divine worlds. The woman in the ritual was no longer a mortal individual but a living sacrifice, a tool for the god to descend and bestow blessings. This leads us to question, did Herodotus really witness this, or did he merely hear of it and exaggerate? Modern scholars are still debating. Some argue that he described the truth, as Egypt did have rituals related to fertility and sex in which animals played a significant role. Others believe that Herodotus, as a Greek, may have intentionally embellished the story to highlight cultural differences, even turning Egyptian customs into a sensational tale for his contemporary audience. Whatever the truth, what is undeniable is that Herodotus' account opened a horrifying window for posterity to look back at ancient Egypt. It showed that religious belief could lead people to acts that go far beyond conventional moral boundaries. For the Egyptians, this offering was not about satisfying pleasure, but was an act of cosmic recreation. In that moment of union, human, animal, and God became one. And thus, no matter how terrifying the ritual, it was cloaked in a sacred mask. But for the Greek and Roman world, what Herodotus recorded became evidence for their scorn and contempt. They saw it as proof of the decadence and sexual obsession of Egypt, a country both great and full of darkness. And this is just the beginning. The rituals involving the Apis bull and the Crocodile of Sobek, two of the most sacred animals, conceal even more horrific and mysterious details. 1. The Apis bull, the living god of fertility. Within the entire Egyptian belief system, Apis held a special place. Not an imagined god like many others, Apis was a living, breathing bull selected from thousands of cattle across the land of the Nile. The selection of Apis, the Egyptians believed that the god Ptah, the creator god, would descend to earth in the form of an Apis bull. Therefore, finding an Apis was akin to searching for the incarnation of a god. A bull recognized as Apis had to have a coat of pure, glossy black fur, a triangular patch of white fur on its forehead, a white mark on its underbelly that looked like a crescent moon, several other signs on its tongue, tail, and hooves. Only when it met all these criteria was it brought to Memphis, the capital of Ptah, to live in a magnificent temple. Apis, from livestock to deity. Apis was raised like a king, given the finest food, a splendid home, and cared for by priests. Every day, people flocked to the temple to admire, pray, and ask for blessings. It was believed that merely seeing Apis was to receive the god's grace. Fertility and sexual rituals associated with Apis. What was special was that Apis symbolized not only life but also mating and reproduction. During certain festivals, Apis was allowed contact with cows considered the god's lovers. The mating of Apis was seen as a ritual of cosmic recreation. There are carvings that show priests and worshippers engaging in rituals simulating sexual acts, with Apis present as a witness. Some Western scholars have even hypothesized that there were rituals of human union with Apis, though this remains highly controversial. True or not, this belief is enough to show that for the Egyptians, Apis was not just an animal but the reproductive axis of the universe. The death of Apis. When an Apis bull died, the entire country entered a period of national mourning. It was mummified and buried in the most luxurious tombs, known as the Serapeum at Saqqara. The Apis tombs, with their giant stone sarcophagi weighing tens of tons, show a reverence that far surpassed that for any other animal. 2. Sobek the crocodile, wild lust and power. If Apis brought a gentle image of reproduction, Sobek represented violence, sexuality, and the thirst for power. Sobek, the crocodile god. Sobek was often depicted with a human body and the head of a crocodile wearing a sun-disk crown. He was a deity who lived underwater, where the Nile was full of danger. The people both feared crocodile attacks and had to pray for their protection. The cult of Sobek. In the Fayum region, an area famous for its crocodiles, temples were erected specifically for Sobek. Crocodiles were raised in sacred pools, fed, and adorned with gold jewelry. When they died, they were mummified and buried with great ceremony. Sobek and sexuality. Sobek was also associated with carnality. In mythology, he repeatedly assaulted goddesses. The image of a crocodile lunging from the water, clamping its jaws on its prey, became a symbol of uncontrolled, violent, yet primal desire. Legend has it that in some rituals, women were brought to Sobek's pools and released into the water as a form of sexual sacrifice. The crocodile would choose its offering, sometimes to devour, sometimes merely as a ritualistic simulation. Whether fact or myth, the meaning behind it remains: the union of humanity with the wild forces of nature. Fear and worship. The Egyptians believed that those who offered themselves to Sobek would be blessed, their families would have good harvests, and their children would be plentiful. But to outsiders, this was proof of religious blindness. 3. Other animals in fertility rituals. Not only Apis and Sobek, but many other species also became symbols of sex and reproduction. Bastet the cat, associated with femininity and charm. During the festivals of Bastet, wine, music, and sex intertwined, turning the celebrations into a collective frenzy of pleasure. Horus the falcon, a symbol of the penis of phallic power. In many victory festivals, the image of the falcon stood next to giant phallic symbols, implying the union of power and sexuality. Goats and antelopes, associated with fertility gods. Some collective mating rituals simulated the behavior of goats, seen as a reenactment of procreative power. 4. Symbols and blurred lines. The greatest controversy is whether the sexual rituals with animals were a physical reality or merely symbolic. If symbolic, then Apis mating with cows, Sobek receiving sacrifices, or Bastet's association with pleasure were all confined to symbolic ceremony. But if practiced, it would mean that a part of Egyptian society had reached an extreme of faith, turning what was sacred into acts that make posterity shudder. Modern archaeologists have yet to provide a definitive answer. But it is clear that the very existence of these records and legends shows that the ancient Egyptians accepted the integration of sexuality, humanity, animals, and divinity into a single whole. The Apis bull, a living god worshipped like a king. The crocodile Sobek, a terror transformed into the power of desire. Bastet the cat, Horus the falcon, symbols of fertility and power. All combined to create a world where sex was not a sin, but the key that unlocked life. Yet at the same time, it was this very belief that pushed people into rituals that terrified other civilizations. After learning about the rituals surrounding the Apis bull, Sobek the crocodile, Bastet the cat, and Horus the falcon, it is easy to envision an Egyptian religious world full of color, vibrant and sacred, but also no less horrifying. The question is, how did Egyptian society react to these rituals, and how did neighboring civilizations view them? The Egyptians, an acceptance of the natural order. In the lives of the Egyptians, these rituals were not considered evil. On the contrary, they were seen as an essential part of their faith. The common worshipper. They believed that thanks to these rituals, the crops would flourish, the Nile would flood bountifully, and their souls would be protected by the gods. The images of Apis, Sobek, or Bastet were not mere myths, but patrons present in every meal, every drop of water. The priestly class. They were the ones who conducted and organized the rituals, turning them into a tool to maintain power. The more mysterious and frightening a ritual was, the more it reinforced the belief that only the priests held the key to communicating with the divine. The nobility and royalty. They supported these rituals because they helped legitimize their rule. The Pharaoh, already considered the son of a god, became even more intimately connected to the divine through these fertility rites. To the Egyptians, what Herodotus called barbaric was simply a sacred offering. The reaction of Greece and Rome, scorn mixed with curiosity. Conversely, for Greece and Rome, civilizations with a more rationalistic outlook, these rituals became subjects of ridicule and contempt. The Greeks saw this as proof of Egypt's extremism and religious naivety. While Greek mythology was also full of stories of Zeus turning into a bull, a swan, etc., the Greeks maintained that these were only myths and were never turned into actual rituals. The Romans. When they conquered Egypt, they were horrified by the tombs of mummified crocodiles, the temples of Apis, and the frenzied sexual festivals. They considered it moral decay, but at the same time, they could not resist its mystical allure. Consequently, many Egyptian customs crept into Roman life, especially in the religion of the goddess Isis. Social and health consequences. It cannot be denied that these rituals also had numerous consequences. Risk of disease. Collective fertility rituals could easily spread epidemics, from venereal diseases to various infections. Fear and trauma. Many ordinary people, especially children, were haunted by the images of sacred crocodiles and by the frenzied festival nights. Social stratification. Those who participated directly in the rituals were often women chosen as offerings or worshippers who had to prove their loyalty. This sometimes created underlying pressure and fear. Why did they persist for thousands of years? Despite their negative consequences, these rituals endured for millennia. The reasons were: absolute belief. The Egyptians believed that all life was linked to sex and reproduction. To abolish the rituals would be to deny the very cycle of the universe. Priestly power. The more mysterious the ritual, the tighter the priest's grip on power. Cultural strength. When a custom has been deeply ingrained in the collective consciousness for many generations, it becomes an obvious truth that cannot be denied. The acceptance of the Egyptians and the revulsion of the Greeks and Romans created a stark contrast. Looking at the same ritual, one side saw it as sacred, the other as depraved. This forces posterity to ask, where does the truth lie? We have journeyed together through a long path from the cultural and religious context of ancient Egypt to the deified figures and animals, and into the horrifying and controversial rituals. We have seen how Egyptian society deemed them sacred, while Greece and Rome saw them as degenerate. And to this day, these rituals still make us shudder. But after all is said and done, the biggest question remains. Can we ever truly understand the spiritual world of the ancient Egyptians? The journey to reconstruct a belief. Looking back, it is easy to see that in Egyptian civilization, sex was not just an instinct but the language of the divine. The Egyptians believed that it was through carnal union, whether between humans or, in rituals involving animals, that the universe was reborn, crops bore fruit, and souls were guided to the afterlife. What horrifies us today was sacred to them. And it is this difference in perspective that has created the veil of mystery shrouding the entire civilization of the Nile. The unanswered questions. Herodotus. Did he record the truth, or did he exaggerate and embellish to make Egypt a land of oddities in the eyes of the Greeks? The lost rituals. How many fertility rituals, how many stories of sexual sacrifice have never been revealed? Because they are hidden in unexcavated tombs, in untranslated papyrus scrolls, symbolism or reality? Did the Egyptians really have carnal relations with animals? Or was it merely a metaphor to describe the union between humans and gods through the symbol of the animal? The legacy today. Today, when we walk into the Cairo Museum or visit sites like Luxor and Karnak, we still see the figures of these sacred animals. The Apis bull, the Sobek crocodile, the Bastet cat, the Horus falcon. They are carved on walls, sculpted in temples, mummified in tombs. They are still there, challenging the eyes of the modern world. And they remind us that religion and belief always reflect human fears and aspirations. If the Egyptians once turned to crocodiles, bulls, or cats to connect with the divine, are we today turning to other symbols, money, technology, power to replace that same longing? An open ending, the unrevealed darkness. Perhaps what we know is only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the golden sands of the Sahara, inside unexcavated pyramids and tombs, countless secrets about fertility rituals linked to animals still lie hidden. Will there come a day when an ancient text is fully translated or a new tomb is opened that we will once again shudder at dark secrets never before revealed? And if so, will we have the courage to face the truth that the greatest civilization in human history also harbored a dark side that is difficult to accept?